Yeah.
I got a couple questions on this for you guys, if I might. And this is a kind of a little bit of a fascinating subject, and just kind of having seen this in the show notes, I had a couple of questions just for you guys and your thoughts on some of this. Looking at the regionals, so I guess my first question, looking back to the regionals, as I recall, when we got our weight and balance, when we were, when I flew the 145, which I know Tony, you flew, and Rob for that, and the 170. As I recall, when we got the numbers, we had both checked bags, and then we also had an entry for gate checked bags, as I recall.
Valet bags, they called them. Yeah.
And because the weights were actually different, depending on whether it was a valet checked bag or whether it was an actual checked baggage. Am I right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I find it a little interesting that when we load those bags at the regional airlines, that gets counted as separate weight. And yet I don't know it's not really been brought up so far, but when that checked bag that I valet checked on my first flight to then connect to my mainline flight to Hawaii, the average passenger weight on both of those airplanes is exactly the same. And yet that valet checked bag is actually calculated in the weight and balance at the regional flight. But that average passenger weight at a mainline airline is actually included in the average passenger weight.
Right.
And nobody really, I don't think a lot of people actually realize that we're not actually just weighing a person, but your average weight actually includes the weight of their carry-on as well, which could be 20 additional pounds. And when you've got 120, we'll just say 120 bags, I mean, that 20 pounds per bag adds up.
Yeah. And something we haven't mentioned, which you're probably getting to now also, is that there's always that margin of error that they factor into all these weights. So I don't remember what the actual margin is, but I'm just going to throw a number out there, which I've heard is a lot of times is 15%. Okay. Something 15% buffer. So even if we're over by, I mean, obviously we're talking hundreds and thousands of pounds, but if we're over, 5 or 10%, it falls within that safety margin. And then the actual structural weight of the airplane has another buffet safety margin built into that too.
Sure.
So obviously the whole idea is not to, encroach on any of those margins, but there is room for error on, above, over underestimating the weight that we actually have.
I just still think it's kind of ridiculous that we do calculate those carry-ons at a regional, but then we don't calculate it, especially when, and then we're going to say an average passenger, even, at 16 pounds higher, there is no way that you can actually realistically convince me that the average weight of a person and their bag getting onto an airplane right now is 184 pounds. There's no way.
Agree. I know that, but you may know, or you may not know, that the weights at a regional airline are also different from what they are at a legacy airline, and it's just has to do with the valet program that they're doing.
That would take that into account.
It takes it into account. So like
every airline is
a carry-on program. I think they call it a carry-on program, where you actually it's kind of counterintuitive, where you have to actually check your carry-on, whereas on the airlines they don't have the carry-on, so the weights are a little higher because they think you're going to bring it on. But,
so it's all an average. It's all measured with a laser and cut with an axe. We've heard this term before. Yeah. And here's something that'll blow your mind. So for a time period when I was first hired on at Sandpiper, and I know, Rob, you dealt with this too, they hammered it into us that we had to know how to do a manual weight and balance, because the electronic weight and balance was brand new to the company back in 2006 and 2005. Yeah. And so we had to really know. Additionally, if the aircraft diverted to an alternate or a different airport at any point in the flight, when you landed, the way the system was set up, you had to fill out an electronic or a manual weight and balance, spin what they called the whiz wheel, or their version of the E6B calculator.
Yeah. Manual calculator.
You had to do a manual weight and balance prior to takeoff, and you had to give, it was a 3-part form. You had to give what the pink portion of the form to the station, the white portion stayed with you in the cockpit, and then the yellow portion you could file away to chief pilot or whatever. So you had to really know how to do this. And then as time progressed, they went 100% electronic weight and balance, and even on I don't know if they're still doing the diversion.
You remember those days, man? You'd sit there, have to show up to work early.
Yeah.
Grab a stack of those forms and pre-fill them out for your day. I mean, you'd take your schedule. You'd have 5 flights, right? And you'd sit there and there's a lot of information that was required on these weight and balance forms.
Yep.
You know, the tail number, the flight number, the departure city, the destination, who the captain was. I mean, and then you'd have to go to each airplane that you're in and get the basic operating weight. I mean, it was...
The zones. Yeah, you had to look at the seat map that was inside the AML cover to figure out Zone A was row 1 through 10 or whatever, and Zone B was like 10 through 15 or whatever. Yeah. So you had to know the zones where people were seated. You had to count how many children versus how many adults.
Right.
Because those were different weights. And then you had to spin it all, and you had to move the CG, the donut or the whiz wheel. You had to clamp it together to get the graph. And so what happened is when we went to electronic, and we were doing electronic 99% of the time, all of a sudden you had to divert. Okay. And now the FO, who was the one that could fill out a weight and balance within a minute, because we did that every leg. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I haven't filled one of these things out in 2 years. How the hell do you do this? And then you come up with these numbers and you're like, these numbers don't make any sense to me. So now you look at the captain and go, hey, captain, do you remember how to do this? And they look at you like you're speaking Chinese. They're like,
they
what?
They had done it in 6 years.
All I do is turn the wheel.
He goes, well, let's do it together. We'll work on it together. And so you're like, okay. So you're figured out and you're like, it looks good enough to me. It says we're legal. Let's go. So what's the trim setting going to be? I don't know. What's it say? 6? 8 up? Yeah. When in doubt, 7.5. When in doubt. So, and this was also an issue because does that sway your decision to divert? Oh God, I don't want to divert because I'm gonna have to fill out a weight and balance. Maybe. Yeah. And then here's another little fun fact that might blow your mind. So as Roger mentioned, we had the carry-on, Rob as well, we had the carry-on weight and balance calculations, meaning the aircraft overhead bins were not large enough to satisfy a standard carry-on suitcase. They were good for backpacks and briefcases and jackets, but not big enough for a standard carry-on. So anyone that's flown on a regional aircraft that's smaller than a 170, basically a 145, CRJ, things like that, you're going to have to valet check your bags, meaning you drop the bag off at the gate, they put a tag on it, and then it gets taken to the cargo hold. And before you exit the jetway, you will retrieve your valet bag.
In theory.
Yep. In theory, that's how it would work. and so there was a weight, the average weight for a carry-on, and I don't remember the exacts, but back then I think it was like
20 pounds or something like that.
I think it might have been more. I think it was 35 pounds for a carry-on. Any bag that was heavy was considered 50 or above. Right. And a valet bag, I think, was 15 pounds.
That's what I meant to say. Yeah. 15 and 30.
So here's the thing. Oh, we're overweight. Well, is there any room in the closet? Can we put some of the valet bags in the closet? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Grab 3 valet bags. Yeah. Let's stack them in the closet. Exactly. That'll put us in there. That'll put us, because we're only over by like 45 pounds. Okay. But now we're fine because
that's
exactly inside what the aircraft.
With the Air Midwest flight is that those are some of the fudging that they could do.
Yeah. So you were like, wait a minute, it was 15 pounds per bag when it was in the aft of the aircraft. But when it's towards the front door in the closet, that was not really meant for more than the passenger in 1A. Bags, 1A, he or she could put their bag there. And then when the FAA caught wind of what was happening, all of a sudden there was a change to our operations manual saying, customer bags are not allowed in the forward closet at any time, and bags are not allowed to be stacked at any time. So the only thing that went in there were the crew bags and coats and things like that. But that's the reason why, is because people found ways to manipulate the system in the game. And I can't tell you how many times that we would go on a flight and the weight and balance, everything came out electronically. We were fine. We get to our destination, and I'm sitting there doing a post-flight, walking around into the cargo hold and watching these rampers open up the cargo hold, and the bags are cubed out, falling over the net, because there's like, wait a minute, there's way more bags in here than the weight and balance that should have indicated. And again, here's another issue. Cubing out, what does that mean? That means you have more bags that will physically fit in your cargo hold. So you end up cubing out. And what do you do with those extra bags? Well, you send them on a later flight. All these weight and balance issues that most pilots just have to know the basics to understand and operate the flight safely, but there's so many issues. And this is what drives the FAA nuts, is that when these things happen, these are the causations to crashes. And people don't think it's a big deal. It's a couple pounds here. It is a big deal. And because we've seen written in blood, as Rob mentioned earlier, over and over and over again, when you fudge the system, this is what's going to happen. You might be able to get past 2,000 times where a plane took off overweight. And it was not a big deal because they were within that safety margin that are built into everything in aviation. But that 2001 or first time that it happened, it led to a crash. And then everything gets changed.
I got one other question, if I may, for you Airbus guys.
Okay.
So when you're talking about this weight and balance thing, we'll just take a 320. What is the capacity of your guys' 320?
Which one? Which one? There's many different
multiple ones.
Aircraft configurations.
Take your pick.
What?
Hold on, I got it here.
160.
Let me see if I can find it.
7? That might be total SOP.
Yeah, there. Like you said, there's a lot of different weights. So a 320. What weight you looking for? Takeoff weight?
No, passenger configuration.
Passenger configuration.
Oh yeah.
Let's just go with a Neo.
From what I learned, there's so many different configurations for all the different airplanes that we have. Even a 320 may have 4 or 5 different configurations.
Well, we have
because we've had all the airlines combined into one. So we've had it.
Yeah.
And we bought airplanes from like Frontier and all that stuff. So all the configurations, interior configurations are different.
Okay, so for just an example, the 321 that Legacy has been retrofitting into what they call the Oasis configuration. This is the configuration where the overhead bins are slightly taller and the bags fit in vertically. Okay. This configuration has 20 business class, 35 main cabin extra, 135 coach. That makes 190 total passengers, not including crew.
All right, so let's just go with that number. All right, and the reason I'm asking is it's interesting that Rob just brought up Frontier, because that's actually kind of where I'm going with this. You're talking about the issue of potential weight, and just using this base, like the specific number doesn't really matter. Where it was 190 seats that you had on this Airbus 321 that you just gave me. Mm-hmm. But when Frontier, they've got I think it's 230.
Okay, because they don't have like the business configuration classes.
Correct. So they can
save space.
So how is it that Frontier is able to put 50 more people? So 50 times, what is that? 10, 50 so times 200? We'll just say that's 10,000 extra pounds. How is it that Frontier can operate? And I honestly don't know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
Okay.
But how is it that Frontier can have 10,000 more pounds of people on board, but not have these fuel problems, but Legacy Airlines does? Do you know what
I don't know if they do. They could potentially do. But here's this. What are you removing out of the aircraft in order to put more in? So how much does a business class, fully electronic, lay down, or, weigh? That seat must weigh a lot more.
And the number of lavatories they have on the airplane, you minus a lavatory, now you're saving 5,000 pounds there.
Do they have the in-flight entertainment?
The airplane itself, from a basic operating weight, is probably just much less in order stripped down.
Just the way they have it configured.
People.
Well, look at their seats. Are their seats as comfortable, which means are they as heavy as a Legacy Airlines seat?
Okay. Let's not compare stop,
seats.
because you're talking to a client that flies on Legacy Airlines from time to time, and do not try to sell me on the comfort of your guys' seats. Don't try to sell me. Don't try to sell me on that trash.
Competitors.
Well, let's just stay in with Legacy, okay? So this Oasis configuration, there's a reason they could put 190 people on the aircraft versus I think it was 182 on the previous configuration, depending on what model it was. Okay, so why? Because they put in the new seats as well. And anybody that's been on a Legacy or a 737 MAX, for example, you look at the seat and you're like, this thing is all plastic and there's barely any padding, and my butt feels like it's been sitting on a concrete slab for the last 20 minutes. What the heck? Yeah. It's because they've saved weight. Like Frontier. It's the same seat. The 737 MAX seat is the Frontier seat.
That's those slimline seats.
Yeah, exactly.
They've made them skinnier, and so over the course of the length of the entire airplane, I think they can fit like 2 more rows.
Exactly.
12 more. And so
more weight. More weight to the aircraft, because now the aircraft's basic operating weight is less. Its max structural weight is the same. So by any definition of mathematics, you can put more cargo and more passengers on there. So I think that is really, to answer your question, is how they can fit more people on an economy seating arrangement aircraft, than they can with an aircraft that caters more towards the business traveler. They want a more cushioned seat. They want better in-flight entertainment. They want the LCD screen in front of them. They want better Wi-Fi. That Wi-Fi antenna that's on the cab of the fuselage, that thing's like a couple thousand pounds.
Well, and actually just bringing up the in-seat entertainment. I mean, the cost and the weight of a screen in every seat. Yeah. I think most legacy airlines as a whole, Delta, United, American, they all have that. And I'm sure that adds to the weight of a seat probably substantially over the course of 180.
You know what it is, Roger? It's not the weight of the LCD screen, because anybody that has a tablet knows that they don't weigh much. The wiring loom. Yeah, every single seat has to have its own wiring loom. So it's the wiring that's associated and the electronics involved, because 120 times 2 pounds, or 180 or 190 seats times 2 pounds per screen. It's not a big deal. You ever hold a couple thousand feet of copper wiring times however many wires are in the loom? That's going to be thousands of pounds.
Yeah, that is a good point, bringing that up with the in-flight entertainment.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just think, you've got a substantial amount more seats, and take your configuration, 319, 320, 321, in that ultra low cost carrier, whether it's Spirit, Frontier. I just use Frontier as an example, but they put a whole lot more people on there, the same type of airplane as the legacy.
But also, how are they operating the airplane? They're not taking that. I don't think they take that airplane to Hawaii, do they?
Not yet. Although I think Frontier just came out that with one of the 321 configurations, they
could probably do with the Neo.
But I don't think that they quite stretch out the range for the fuel quite as